Good evening, everyone. I'm John OLoughlin, and welcome to my channel. It's called McDuff Lives. And tonight, it's Monday night. I'm doing a weekly series here in July to talk in more detail about my father, whose career and story I have told in the book that I have published with the help of Andy and George Webb and all the guys at Neighborhood News, guys and gals, I should say. And so this is the book, but there's only so much time that we can print them. And I am waiting until we can do more of a little bit more of a paperback look, probably something like a 6x9 or something before I invest in some more, just to keep you updated. The way to get a copy of it, best way is to get it on Kindle. Just go to Amazon, and if you download the Kindle version for $10, you can read it on your computer. You don't have to have a Kindle, or you can get a Kindle, or you can just print it on a printer or send it over to Kinko's and get yourself a copy that way. Because it's probably going to be some time before we have hard copies available. But I do encourage you to go ahead and get it. The hard copies, the way it's looking, are going to cost a good bit more anyway. So easiest way, and I would appreciate it. Um, $10 toward the cause, and you get the whole book on your computer or your Kindle device. And I really do appreciate George Webb's encouragement as he uh, kept at me until I got this book written. There it is on Kindle, and uh, thanks very much. Andy took that picture, the one on the back. We don't see that on the Kindle, darn it. Anyway, thanks, Andy, for doing all the layout and title and all that stuff. Great, looks good. Well, good evening, everybody. Thanks for being here, and thanks for your interest in my dad's story. My dad was born in Connecticut on March 21st, 1920, just as the uh, Prohibition era was getting started around the country. His parents were in the saloon business, which is not good if you're going into 10, 11, 12 years of illegal alcohol trade. But Connecticut in particular, and most of New England, really didn't pay a whole lot of attention to the feds on that issue, and they kept going with their speakeasies. It made a lot of money for the Bronfmans and the mafia that receives the liquor, and Purple Gang in Detroit, and the whatever that navy was called that they ran the booze across the lakes to America from Canada. But it was all a big scam, obviously, to make money through legal and illegal means for the elites in Great Britain, that being essentially the royal family, the Haig family, Haig, of course, of the Scotch brand, and all of that liquor that was illegal was generally coming from a British distillery or Canadian. Anyway, that was the era in which my dad grew up, and in 1929 the crash. So my dad is certainly a Depression baby. He grew up in his paternal grandparents' home. His father, Tom Sr., and his mother, um, Margaret Coakley, or Peg Coakley. She and he divorced when Daddy was only about 2 years old. She claiming that my grandfather was cruel and abusive and an alcoholic. So that was why he ended up in the paternal uh, grandparents' home, where he was really not. It was like they didn't really have room for him. All the kids. They had 5 other kids, and they all had a room, but he didn't have a room. They just gave him a kind of a space. It was described to me as a space under the stairs, like maybe a large closet or something. But um, my mother wondered if the little bit of scoliosis that he had came from sleeping in a cramped space, but who knows? Anyway, he grew up and went to public school, got taken out of public school in the 8th grade and popped into Loomis Preparatory School, the elite prep school in Windsor, Connecticut, which George and I visited in the fall of 2019, and did well at school, played football, and was also at I think an honors student. Yeah, he was an honors student, and got a full scholarship to Harvard. Not a football scholarship, by the way. It was an academic scholarship, and Harvard at that time had just abolished their football scholarship, so you had to get an academic one, and that's what he did. And his class of 1942, graduated just as the United States had entered World War II on December 7th, 1941. My dad then immediately joined the United States Navy Midshipman School, where he studied naval tactics science and became a midshipman. And then in February of 1943 was commissioned as an ensign, sent to Washington, D.C. for further training in bomb disposal, and I do believe also in intelligence related photographic interpretation, which was one of the things that were taught at the Naval Photographic Lab just across South Capitol Street from the uh, DC Fire Academy, where he was trained as a bomb disposal expert. Well, that was in 42 and early 43. Then he is shipped out to uh, San Francisco to join the USS Nashville, classic, one of the most important ships of World War II, a light cruiser, which became General MacArthur's flagship during the island hopping campaign, and in which we have a photograph of my dad and General MacArthur on that bridge of the USS Nashville, which we have in the book. And here's my dad with the, oops. You can imagine how I felt when I first saw this. I saw it online. Where's the camera? There we go. Oops, sorry. Sorry, the book is blocking the microphone. But my dad is the person in the lower left with the big binoculars. Um, and I was just so amazed when I saw him there. I think that's General Kenny, the Air Force chief, next to him, another officer, and then General MacArthur himself there with a little bit of sun on his face looking off to the left. So there's my dad within a few steps of General Douglas MacArthur on October 20th, 1944, the very day of the invasion of Leyte Gulf. And amazingly, the same place where Doug Valentine's father was being held captive at the what he calls the Hotel Tacloban. Tacloban was the capital city, is the capital city of Leyte, the island of Leyte, and so that's when Doug's father was liberated. When my father was there with General MacArthur, fulfilling his "I shall return" promise. Well, Dad went to law school after the war, and upon graduation in 1949, he joined the FBI. And one wonders why would my dad, here he is, he's got this extended family in Hartford. He's got his uncle John, who is ready to push him into the corporate white shoe lawyer world, and work his way into, that corporate mentality. Well, he just couldn't do it. He just didn't want to be that guy. He didn't want to be that person who is chained to a corporate existence in which you basically are working for somebody else, doing what you're told, towing the line, and waiting, and basically having to make moral compromises on behalf of a corporation when your real instinct is to help poor people. That was my dad's real desire. He said that the only thing he ever really wanted to do was to help people less fortunate than himself. Well, you can imagine a personality like that is not going to get along very well in the corporate world. So I think he made a good choice to go into some other type of service, federal service or service to the country. But why the FBI? Well, first of all, we know that he was offered a commission in the regular Navy, and he would have taken that, but for the family told him, and his father, really, his father, the alcoholic, I think was in a bit of trouble when my dad did not accept the path that was laid out for him by Uncle John and the Hartford Insurance Company and the New England WASP families of Connecticut. I think they had their eye on him. They had kind of promoted him into these positions where he had all these opportunities. But my dad had been through a war with guys that lost their lives, and I think it was almost a third of his crew on the Nashville that was killed in the kamikaze attack, and another third of them were severely wounded and ended up in hospital in Tacloban. Well, things like that, he identifies already as the son of a broken marriage where the mother ends up living on the wrong side of the tracks with her family of origin and not having the benefit of education and you know connections in the establishment the way Uncle John had. Well, she was a woman who had her heart on her sleeve 24 hours a day. She was a really, really good hearted, sweet woman who worked very hard, uh, did married a flyer named Frank Coakley who was flying the hump at the China Burma India theater during the war, flying across the Himalayas to bring supplies to Chiang Kai shek's army in Chongqing. Well, she was a person with a musical heart. She wrote songs. And I'm sorry I never got to hear her perform or sing or do anything like that because I guess she was probably just too old. She had given up everything to take care of Frank because of his emphysema, and he lingered until 1972, I think. So she lost her son in 71, and then her husband in 72. But she was a tough, optimistic woman, and anyway, that was his mother. Trying to stick back to the to the FBI. Why did he join the FBI? Well, because he wanted to help people less fortunate than himself, but also because I think he sensed the importance of the FBI as an instrument of national security. And national security, of course, would have been on anybody's mind that served as an officer in World War II. So let me bring in a little bit of text from some of our books here. Let's start with Trading with the Enemy by Charles Higham, a book that I've just about finished reading myself. I read some portions of it the other day on my show on the last minefields that we did. But as we as we know now from reading this book, the Rockefellers and Chase Bank, the Chase Bank would be the Chase Manhattan Bank, but at this time it's just the Chase Bank, were doing business with the Nazis. And this is where I think it all really comes from. Why was my dad interested in joining the FBI? Well, we don't know what the FBI was doing in World War II. Nobody tells us stories. That's one of the good things about this book, Enemies by Tim Weiner, because he does tell us what Hoover was doing during World War II, and he was very, very active and protective of our national security. Well, here's the key. This is in 1940, okay? So the war's going on in Europe. The Nazis are already doing their bad stuff, and they're not declared an enemy, but they are our enemy. And I'll just read. The Chase directors and the Barons von Schroeder were afraid that if Secretary of Treasury Henry Morgenthau discovered the true facts, the U.S. government might take measures detrimental to the German government. It was an act of total collaboration with the Nazis. In May 1940, a prominent diamond merchant in New York City, Leonard Smith, began smuggling commercial and industrial diamonds to Nazi Germany through Panama. Smith's company was theoretically Dutch, which placed it under the provenance of the Nazis. But its stock was in fact owned by the International Trading Company, which was located in Guernsey in the Channel Islands. President Roosevelt had issued a freezing order precluding the shipment of monies to Europe, especially if these might seem to be to the advantage of the Axis. A few days after the Smith account was frozen, Chase officials unblocked the funds at Smith's request. The funds flowed out to Panama, allowing diamonds to be sent through the Canal Zone to Berlin. On June 17, 1940, when France was collapsing, Morgenthau, via Roosevelt, again blocked the French account to prevent money going to the enemy. Within hours of the blocking, somebody at Chase authorized the South American branches of the Banque Française to transfer more than $1 million from New York to special accounts in Argentina and Uruguay. The bank was paid 50% owned by the Banque de Paris et de Pays-Bas, which is a Chase and Standard Oil affiliate, and 50% owned by the Mussolini-controlled Banca Commerciale Italiana. In South America, these banks were working partly for the Axis. Larkin continued to permit free withdrawals from the special accounts, even though he knew perfectly well that such accounts were cloaks for Nazi funds. On June 23, 1941, J. Edgar Hoover wrote to Morgenthau, quote, "During the monitoring of foreign funds at the Chase Bank, FBI discovered various payments to oil companies in the United States. There are indications that Standard Oil Company of New Jersey has been receiving money from German oil sales by order of the Reichsbank." Throughout 1941, the German-American Commerce Association Bulletin, a pro-Nazi publication, repeatedly disclosed connections between the Chase Bank and the Reichsbank. It revealed that the Reichsbank maintained its account at the Chase Bank. It also maintained an account at the National City Bank, when the Reichsbank was personally under the directorship of Adolf Hitler. Any transactions between Winthrop Aldrich and Dr. Walter Funk had to be approved by Hitler in person. Now, who is Winthrop Aldrich? He is John D. Rockefeller's wife's father, so father-in-law, another one of the great wealthy families of the, of the Golden Age. So I say that in order to make the case of what I think my dad was doing was if he was as aware as I think he was of what was really going on in this country in terms of the push and pull between those who, during the Roosevelt administration, had favored the Soviets and those who actually favored the Nazis, and had seen, as somebody who was going to law school in Hartford, Connecticut, the insurance capital of the world at the time, and one of the great centers of old New England wealth, he saw what was going on. And he would have joined the fray on the side of the FBI because he would know that these white-shoed lawyers were financing the enemies of the United States. And so two things that I would suggest to you to think about here. Number one, that as much as we didn't like J. Edgar Hoover for various things he's done in I'm absolutely condemn what he did to Martin Luther King and so many other the COINTEL and it was his program. It was Sullivan running it, but Sullivan and uh, anyway, the other guy that was the top of section of Division 5. They were, they're soldiers. They were guys that would not hesitate to take a life of somebody they felt was an enemy of the United States. They had that mentality of World War II. So if my dad sees that these corrupt lawyers and corporate heads, like an Aldrich and a Rockefeller, can profit off of the lives of his shipmates, then I think that's a pretty strong motivation to try to do something about it. Well, for whatever reason, my dad did join the FBI. If you haven't got it yet, get a copy of this book, which is George Webb's really great book about my dad. George's book is kind of taking what I have, from my father's actual records and memories, and gone and done his metadata research and come up with all kinds of new connections that are really, really worth your attention. And I gave him a number of my best pictures of my dad. So now that I got the book here, I can just hold them up and show them to you. But definitely get a copy of this from Neighborhood News Studio. No reason in the world for them to have dumped this at Amazon, and I do not intend to give Amazon the business. But here, look, this is a picture that I gave to George. So that's not a banana in his pocket, okay? He is standing there in about 1950 in front of their apartment, having just gotten married. And he is giving a death-dealing look to the camera and holding in his pockets evidence of his seriousness. So there he is. That's when he's just started in Washington, D.C. As a FBI special agent working for J. Edgar Hoover. The picture, I think, is a message to people back in Hartford to say, don't mess with me. I'm doing this thing. This is my life, and I will enforce my rights. So, what's behind that is I can just speculate, but I know that these people were serious. I think they really had the expectation that they were going to control my dad for his entire life and profit off of him, like a servitor in Dr. Hamamoto's language. If you recall, Charles Higham, the author, refers to these elite businessmen as the fraternity, and it includes both British, American, German, Dutch, and others who are in that high fraternity of finance where they basically kind of have a handshake deal amongst themselves and do whatever the heck they want to in terms of creating cartels and secret conspiracies and agreements among themselves to control the wealth of the world. This chapter 4 is called The Mexican Connection, and I think it's helpful to see what I mean. Even the supposed enemies of the fraternity were connected to it by almost invisible threads. One of Jersey Standard's most powerful rivals in the field of petroleum supplies to Germany, William Rhodes Davis, that's Rhodes, Davis, his Davis Oil Company, was connected to Hermann Goering and Heinrich Himmler. Davis was linked to Hermann Schmitz and I.G. Farben through the Americans Werner and Karl von Klemm. New York diamond merchants, who were first cousins to Nazi Foreign Minister Joachim von Ribbentrop by marriage, and through the National City Bank. The von Klemms were fanatical devotees of Germany, even though both had become all American residents in 1932. They used a device typical in Nazi circles, a device copied ironically from the Rothschilds. One brother stayed in Berlin, the other remained in New York. They were connected to the Schroeder banks through interlocking directorships and on the board of a company that helped finance General Motors in Germany, along with I.G. Farben. In 1931, they financed the Gestapo, with funds supplementing those supplied by Schroeder's Stein Bank. Another fraternity link was their involvement with First National Bank of Boston, an associate of the Bank for International Settlements. And by the way, the First National Bank of Boston is the bank that ends up financing all those helicopters that went into the Vietnam War. Story told by Fletcher Prouty. Just to keep these things connected, First National Bank of Boston is a very interesting institution and an associate of the Bank for International Settlements. They conceived the idea of unblocking First National's blocked German marks to build a vast oil refinery for Goering's Air Force and for Farben and Eurotank near Hamburg, with Karl von Klemm in charge. The oil This oil would bypass the terms of the Versailles Convention and supply Goering's so-called Black Luftwaffe, which was secretly being prepared for world conquest. In order to secure the oil for the refinery, the von Klemm brothers had to find an American who would aid and abet them. The choice was easy. From 1926 to 1932, Werner von Klemm had financially sustained a largely unsuccessful oil prospector and confidence trickster named William Rhodes Davis. Davis was, on the face of it, unprepossessing. He was born in Montgomery, Alabama, poorly educated, railroad crazy, He dabbled in the oil business, but constantly went broke. Um, he traveled to Berlin in 1933, obtained the personal approval of Hitler. He arrived at Adlon Hotel, where Karl von Klemm arranged a reception for them to meet Hermann Schmitz of Farben, Kurt von Schroeder, and other German members of the fraternity. He was welcome at once when he gave the group the Nazi salute as he entered the room. Next morning, 2 Gestapo officers delegated by Himmler arrived at the door of his suite. They carried with them a letter from the Führer. The former brakeman and candy butcher was overwhelmed. He could not believe he had received so signal an honor. The letter asked him to meet with Finance Minister Hjalmar Schacht at the Reichsbank. When he arrived, Schacht seemed cold and uninterested and brushed the whole matter aside. Schacht already had deals going with Walter Teagle and Sir Henry Detterding of Shell Oil. What did he want with this small fry? Furious, Davis returned to the Adlon empty-handed. He wrote to Hitler, insisting on better treatment. Hitler replied immediately in person, asking him to return to the Reichsbank the following morning. Davis arrived in the boardroom at 11 a.m. As FBI records show, Schacht smiled faintly in the corner, obviously in no mood to talk, but a door flew open and 30 directors of the bank appeared to greet Davis with warm handshakes. Hitler strode in. Everyone jumped to attention and gave the Nazi salute. Hitler said, "Gentlemen, I have reviewed Mr. Davis's proposal and it sounds feasible. I want the bank to finance it." And then he walked out. So here is the FBI following these von Klemm brothers and this guy, William Rhodes Davis, and I think that Rhodes' middle name is significant, and seeing that these people are intimately involved with Hitler. My point is, J. Edgar Hoover understands that this is a international conspiracy of these elite people in what Higgum calls his fraternity. And anyone can see that if that is the way of the future for America, then the average person's future looks very bleak and looks kind of like a dystopian future, as they say, a kind of a 1984 style where you're under surveillance and you have to do what you're told. And that, I think, is where my dad draws the line and says, no, I'm going to fight against that. I'm going to support Mr. Hoover's efforts to stop that. So I thought I had that other page. I should get it because I want to read it to you. Oh, I could have swore I had it. It's the page where he describes what he did for the first 2.5 years as an FBI agent, and that is he was assigned in 1950 to head a team of secretaries and agents to review files. These are called application files. And these are the files that George Webb has talked about, the 68,000 files. And, my studies have indicated to me that these files are most likely applications for visas on behalf of people that the CIA has brought into the country or wants to bring into the country. Probably already brought them in and, get permission later. And that means there's a pile of these things sitting on J. Edgar Hoover's desk. And when my dad comes along, I think he basically said, "Here, Tom, you deal with this." So my dad ends up reviewing all of these files, which I believe it contained, the very Nazis and the Eastern European agents of the former Nazis, the Gehlen organization, the Reinhard Gehlen organization, sleeper agents coming into the United States, plus the scientists, of course, and the Nazi, like Erich Traub, the biological warfare specialist, Mengele, and all these others that were basically let go on rat lines. And it must have been horrific for my dad to have to review some of those files. And the pressure, of course, was on from the CIA to let these people in. Hoover opposed the CIA all the way. And that's where I think the American people just don't understand what this fight was really about. In June of 1956, my dad was released from that duty and was given his choice of assignments, and he chose counterintelligence. And that's where his career basically was centered around, was in particular surveillance of the Soviet agents that were here in this country, in particular in the Washington area. I'm going to read from his resume here. Special agents of GS-13 are assigned to the general investigative or supervisory duties, which include a wide variety of unusually specialized, complex, and unrelated matters. They may be called upon to participate in conferences pertaining to the safeguarding of the security of the United States, or in statewide conferences of local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies. They're called upon from time to time to offer opinions and assist in formulation of overall policies and procedures, independently or with responsibility for directing the work of experienced special agents or other personnel. As required on individual case assignments, they plan and conduct complete investigations of matters under the jurisdiction of the FBI. The investigations conducted involve extensive ramifications, such as those where operations and activities being investigated are very large in number, or a very wide diversity, or their interrelationship is extremely difficult to establish. There are a very large number of separate and distinct investigative matters growing out of the original case assignment. Organizations which are the subject of investigation are very large in size or are very complex in structure with a very large number of primary and subsidiary activities. Investigations are of major interregional dimensions or are nationwide in origin or coverage with occasional international implications. There usually is very frequent or very extensive involvement of other subjects or principles, or there are other characteristics of investigative assignments which are equivalent to the above in scope and coverage. Sorry, I'm trying to get to the interesting part. The offenses, violations, or investigative matters are of an unusually serious nature. They usually are indications of actual or potential threats or challenges to the stability and or integrity of major segments of the national welfare or security. The results, effects, or consequences to a major degree constitute deterrence to crimes or violations, influence changes in laws, regulations, policies, operations, or practices, and or establish precedents for future actions. These matters involve highly delicate issues, for example, important political, social, or similar implications. I'm going to skip through some of this. I've handled security matters through and including top secret classifications. These matters have included efforts on the part of the Soviet bloc to penetrate agencies in the defense community, efforts to recruit and compromise scientists engaged in work vital to the national security. What do you think that would be? And efforts to document, place, and operate illegal espionage agents in the United States. It has been my responsibility not only to handle specific cases individually and as a group coordinator, but also to recommend measures designed to thwart the aims of the agents of the Soviet State Security Service and the Chief Intelligence Directorate of the Ministry of Defense. I have personal and primary responsibility for handling interviews with the most sensitively placed defector sources. The extreme delicacy of many of these cases arises from the involvement of representatives of foreign governments, from interest of the press and other mass media, from the sensitive positions of prominent individuals, both in government and in private life, from the danger of exposing sources through the reporting of specific information, and from the ultimate danger of not only embarrassing the government, but doing substantive harm to the execution of foreign policy. For the past 4 years, I've directed the efforts of a group of from 5 to 9 special agents in coping with a specific segment of Soviet operational intelligence activity. This task has involved a considerable research and analysis of information regarding the history, organization, techniques, and personnel of hostile intelligence agencies. It has required maintaining a sound level of general information regarding the political posture of this country on international issues in order to recognize targets of political as well as strategic importance. Um, it goes on, and will I will certainly um, try to make it try not to try not to read the whole thing while I still make my point, which is I think my dad was involved in what I'm about to read to you from Enemies by Tim Weiner. This is a history of the FBI. And now we're talking about Soviet agents. I mean, FBI's agents operating against the Soviets. This is called Project Solo. The FBI's most valued secret agents of the Cold War were two brothers, Morris and Jack Childs. The operation the Bureau built on their work posed great risks and the promise of even greater rewards. Morris Childs was a Russian Jew, born Moishe Chilovsky outside Kiev in 1902. He came to America in 1911 and became an important figure in the Communist Party in the 1930s and 40s, serving as the editor of its newspaper. He had fallen out with the party in 1948. 3 years later, the FBI approached him. 3 years later makes 1951, so my dad was definitely in circulation in D.C. at that time. Don't know if he was involved that early or not. 3 years later, the FBI approached him and his younger brother Jack as part of a new program called Top Lev, in which FBI agents tried to talk to top-level Communist Party members and officials, talking them into becoming informants. Jack Childs, a born hustler and a bagman for the party's underground financial operations, readily took the offer. He eventually convinced Morris to join him as an undercover communist for the FBI. Morris rose higher and higher in the secret hierarchy. He won the trust of the party's leaders. In the summer of 1957, they proposed that he serve as their international emissary in an effort to reestablish direct personal, political, and financial ties with the Kremlin. If Moscow approved, the FBI had a chance to place a spy inside the highest councils of the Soviet Union. Morris Childs would be reporting to Hoover as the Foreign Secretary of the Communist Party of the United States of America. Hoover's intelligence chief, Al Belmont, could barely contain his excitement. We've been trying for some time to produce direct evidence of the fact that the CPUSA follows orders and takes direction from the Communist Party Soviet Union. If we are able to develop such evidence, it would not only strengthen our case against the CPUSA, but would enhance tremendously the Bureau's prestige as an intelligence agency. Hoover briefed the cabinet about the Solo mission on November 6, 1958. For the next 2 years, he sent summaries of his reporting directly to the president, the vice president, the secretary of state, and the director of central intelligence. He took pleasure in concealing the source of his intelligence from Allen Dulles and the CIA. Quote, I flatly refuse to disclose the disclosure of the informant, irrespective of any fits Allen Dulles or anyone else throws. Signed, H. Hoover reported that the world's most powerful communists, Mao Zedong and Nikita Khrushchev, were at each other's throats. The breach between Moscow and Beijing was a revelation to President Eisenhower. It had been the consensus of American intelligence that the communist leaders were of one mind. For years, Eisenhower had been relying on flawed intelligence from the CIA and the Pentagon about the military and political strengths of his enemies. Solo's reporting provided Ike with insights that no eavesdropping satellite or spy plane could ever deliver, portraying communist leaders as confused and quarreling. Hoover said Moscow had decided, quote, the main task of the Communist Party USA is to fight for Negro equality and integration. The FBI noted that the Kremlin had asked Solo to send a copy of Martin Luther King Jr.'s first book, the newly published Stride Toward Freedom, written with the help of Stanley Levison, King's close advisor and a former member of the Communist Underground. This evidence of ties between international communism and the American Civil Rights Movement was electrifying to Hoover. The idea that they were connected through covert operations was an elemental part of his thinking and his conduct for the rest of his life. So, what does this mean? Why does this matter so much? Why do I say McDuff's life matters? Because he was Hoover's top Soviet expert. He was the guy that would have been debriefing these Childs brothers and the Venona secrets, which we don't have time to get into that, but there's a whole literature over this program called Venona. Spying on the Soviet Union, Hoover was the person that had the spies in place in the Soviet Union when the Cuban Missile Crisis happened. And although the CIA was saying, you know, you've got to you can't back down, you've got President Kennedy being informed by Hoover through his sources that no, the Soviets aren't ready they're not close enough to launching to that you've got some more time that you can negotiate. And it got like 2 or 3 more days of like, President Kennedy didn't have to worry about getting nuked by Russian missiles from Cuba because Hoover knew that the Russians were not ready because he had spies in place. Where does all this stuff about, Hoover and his alleged cross-dressing and sexual, you know, that stuff may have, who knows, it may have something behind it, but the books I've read indicate that probably that's propaganda that we've been fed in order to discredit Hoover and shield the CIA from the fact that it was not an effective intelligence agency. And in fact, in fact, they had been giving Eisenhower the wrong information all the time. They'd been saying, China and Russia are a monolithic communist agency. That was John Foster Dulles' line, right? That's the narrative they were feeding to President Eisenhower, but it wasn't true. Sorry, I didn't mark this page very well. I have here a file of letters from my dad's FBI file. The first one here is a memorandum to Special Agent T.F. O'Loughlin Jr., signed by M.W. Johnson, the special agent in charge of the Scarbeck case. I'm taking this means to express my appreciation for your role in the espionage investigation concerning Urban Chambers Scarbeck. The teamwork, enthusiasm, and esprit de corps which you demonstrated while conducting sensitive and delicate physical surveillance are commendable. Your assignment was executed with tact and sound judgment. Thank you for a job well done. Signed, M.W. Johnson, Special Agent in Charge. You can look up M.W. Johnson if you want. He was the special agent in charge in Chicago during the 50s and one of the more important historical FBI agents of our time. But what's even more important is who was Urban Scarbeck. And Urban Scarbeck was a spy, a Polish spy, working in the State Department, right under the nose of John Foster Dulles near the end of Dulles' life, but in the late 50s. The only time that a State Department employee has ever been convicted of espionage. And George Webb and I, George really led the charge. We went down to the Library of Congress and pulled the National Archives and got the file pulled. And we got the actual jacket from the trial of United States versus Urban Scarbeck. And you can see what they did. It's a classic, femme fatale lure. Got the guy to feed secrets to the woman and convicted him for it. And as George discovered after his study and with his perspective, this was kind of a cover-up for deeper espionage that was going on in the U.S. Embassy in Warsaw during the 50s. Probably something more interesting and bigger was going on that got covered up, but they had to do something, so they slapped Urban Scarbeck with a conviction. Here's another one of these commendations, 1958, signed by J. Edgar Hoover. There's his signature there if you want to See that? Here's another one I haven't been able to chase down. June 26, 1959, memorandum to Special Agent T.F. O'Loughlin Jr. I've been advised of the excellent work performed by you in connection with placing a DESCO subject in touch with the subject Dmitry K. Ryzantsev. The thought and planning which you devoted to this situation are indeed commendable. Signed, James Gale, Special Agent in Charge. Well, I think there's about maybe 8 or 10 of these in this folder. I had the pleasure of talking to retired Special Agent Ray Batfinis in preparation for my dad's memorial. And he runs a website called FBIstories.com. And I talked to him a couple of times and exchanged some information with him. And he was just so amazed and supportive of my effort to celebrate my dad's life. Right up until about a week before the event, maybe 2 weeks before the event, something like that, when I just told George Webb about Mr. Batfinis's willingness to come and make a presentation during my memorial service on June 6th. And George reported that on his YouTube show. And that apparently triggered something, because from that moment on, Mr. Batfinis would not return my calls, nor did he respond to my emails, even though he had been a very, very nice and helpful. And really, I thought he was going to do a great job helping me dig up some more information. But, that avenue has been closed now. And I don't know what caused it, except for it could just be the general, that my dad is not to be spoken of, even, this late date. It might be true. It might be that there's a fatwa, remember the fatwa that they gave to that author from the Ayatollah, can't talk to you, can't read your books, can't mention your name. I think sometimes somebody issued a fatwa against my dad, and that's why Mr. Batvinis and others have refused to talk to me. But I think probably more likely it has to do with George Webb's trolls, a couple of people that have been trolling him for a few years now, and may have called up and tried to spook the gentleman from cooperating. So I didn't have the benefit of his participation at the memorial service. But, he can always change his mind. I would love to talk to Mr. Matt Venice once again. He seemed like a good guy. Well, the hour's up, and I guess I rambled a little bit more than I should have to try to cover all the stuff I brought to talk about. Did not get to everything, but I can do some more on this next week on Monday. But the main thing I want to try to say tonight is that J. Edgar Hoover, for all that we can criticize him, and he was a racist, and he grew up in Washington, D.C., under, like President Woodrow Wilson, one of those reactionary KKK racist jerks that got into power in Washington, D.C. And the city was a white supremacist city. And he was hired to keep it that way. And that's the way he saw it. But I think it's also the case that the Kremlin probably did want to use the civil rights movement to destroy and conquer and divide. Divide and conquer America. And perhaps that was part of the strategy. It makes sense. But, the FBI certainly went too far with that. But the real enemy is the enemy that we started talking about at the beginning of this show, and that is the enemy that's represented by the Chase Bank and the Chase Manhattan Bank and the Rockefeller and Standard Oil and IT&T and Sostenes Ben and the whole fraternity, the combination of IG Farben and Standard Oil, all of those people that were willing to continue business as usual at the expense of my father's fellow sailors, from your fathers and grandfathers and their fellow soldiers and sailors and Marines and Coast Guards and Merchant Marines and everybody else that lost lives in that horrible war. Business as usual is not the American way. And that was McDuff's choice, to fight for the American way.